Good morning, everyone. I am Claus Leitzmann from Germany. I have studied biochemistry and became a nutritionist and was fortunate enough to live in different countries to see how different foods affect people. My first station was the United States of America, and this was in the 1950s, at a time when in Europe people were still hungry, and in the US people had plenty to eat. And I saw the consequences of the eating when it is unlimited, because even at that time many people in the United States were overweight, had diabetes, and many of the Western diseases. And after a number of years in the United States, we had the opportunity to move to Thailand. Thailand at that time was a very poor country, and you saw many people that went hungry, children were dying. It has changed now, but at that time it was a very critical situation. And by comparing these two situations, I came to the conclusion, and of course I was reading about it too, that it would be worthwhile considering a moderate diet, a diet that contains not too much fat, not too much products of animals, because in our sedentary society, where physical activity is limited, this would be the best way to avoid overweight and also these Western diseases. So when I came back to Germany, we became vegetarians. Now we didn't insist on everybody else become a vegetarian, but it was our goal. And this, I was at the university, had many students, and they, of course, we taught them about nutrition, so we had to tell them about the proper nutrition. And it was important to me to convince the students also that it was not necessary in the first step to become a vegetarian, but to reduce the amount of animal products, not only for health reasons, but also for ecological reasons and for social reasons. Because the issue of hunger in the world, food export, food import, feeding animals with grain, which can be used for human nutrition, that was a much bigger issue at that time, at least in the professional circles. And I think I was able to convince many of my students that it would be worthwhile thinking about this and doing something about it. And this has been my experience till that time. It is not necessary for people to start to be a vegetarian from today to tomorrow. The most important thing is to get them to think about food in the first place. And my experience is whether they start and become macrobiotics, or whether they want to be raw food eaters, or whether they want to go with the hay diet, this diet that originated in the United States, or do anything else. It doesn't matter much. The most important thing is that people start thinking about it. And once they do, usually they find the right way. And I've met many people that have been introduced to this in a rather liberal way, not in a dogmatic way. They came to it after, sometimes it took months, sometimes it took years or much longer, and eventually they knew they had to change their food and their nutrition. So this is another, I think, important aspect that one shouldn't expect, even if you have good arguments, that people change their life or their food style from today to tomorrow. You have to give them time. And I always say, none of us really has reached the end of it. We are all on the way. Some people are at the beginning, some are a little bit further on, some are very close to the goal, but none of us really reaches this. So I think the perfect life, as some people envision it, is hard to achieve. And I like to compare this with some of the statements that were made by the old Chinese philosophers. There is Lao Tzu, who said, the longest way starts with the first step. In other words, once you make the first step, then you're on the way. Then you don't have to push the people. Then they want to do it themselves. And there's another famous Chinese philosopher, Confucius. And Confucius said, if you take the first step, you already finished half of your way. And I think that says about the same, that once you start, once you give people the opportunity and the possibility to start, then usually they'll continue by themselves. You don't have to push them. So the effort isn't that big. You have to give an example, which I find, coming back to young people, one of the most important things. I know this from our grandchildren. It doesn't matter what you tell them. They observe what you're doing, and that's what they want to do. I may shortly tell the story of one of our grandsons who lived at our house. When he was about 4 years old, we had a birthday party for him, and his friends came for the birthday party. And we served food, like carrots and olives and sauerkraut and things that we normally eat. And he was eating it. And his friends were wondering, and they looked at him, and they said to him, Sebastian, why are you eating this? Do you like that? Because all the others didn't eat it. Mm-hmm. So he had never had this question before, so he was wondering himself. He said, oh, I eat it because my grandfather eats it. And that showed to me once more, it is the example that you give. Mm-hmm. And I always had the feeling, at the university, I had many colleagues, and none of them were vegetarians. I was the only vegetarian. And interestingly enough, for some reason or another, these students know what their professors are doing in private. I never told them, but somehow they know. And I realized again that many of the students said, well, he is doing it, so it's an example to follow. And I think every adult, not only adults, everybody should realize that he is giving and is an example for the people surrounding him, whether it's in the family, whether it's at the workplace, whether it's at sports activities. And I meet people that say, I don't want to be an example. I want to do what I please, so leave me alone. I don't want to be an example. But in fact, you cannot make this decision. You are being taken as example by other people. And I think the fact, if you realize this, that this happens, makes you an example.
May I ask you, what is your position concerning the consumption of dairy products and eggs in the vegetarian diet?
Well, we have in the vegetarian nutrition, we have different groups. Some people are very liberal about it. The only thing they don't want to eat is meat. They still eat eggs and dairy products, sometimes also fish, and still they consider themselves as vegetarians because they don't eat meat. Now, as we know, there are vegans, people that avoid any kind of food from animals. And actually this, of course, would be the ultimate food that people should eat, because if you really believe that we should not misuse animals, and if you really believe that we can live from plants alone, then you should do it. And it is possible, we know that. There are a lot of studies that show that vegans are healthier in many ways than the normal population, sometimes even better than the vegetarians, and that there is no need for them to take any supplements. This has, of course, been also a big issue about supplements. People do become vegetarians and vegans for different reasons. And my experience is, because we have analyzed this with larger population groups, if a person becomes a vegan for health reasons, then usually they have no problems because they are interested in this issue, and they get the proper information about how to avoid malnutrition. But there are also people that become vegans for ethical reasons or for religious reasons. And these people are concerned much more about the moral aspects of it and the welfare of the animals. And they don't think much about their own health. And then it happens that these people become malnourished. They have deficiencies in certain vitamins or also minerals. Because their approach is, we leave all products from animals out of our food, and then we are vegans. And that is not the best way to do it. You really have to think about it. How do you get the protein that you need, the vitamins and the minerals? And we know that there are ways to do it properly, but we have found in our studies whole families, mothers, fathers and children, who were really malnourished. And usually the first thing you usually see is iron deficiency. And you see iron deficiency anemia. People are very pale, they are not really motivated, and also they are not very happy. And you can tell sometimes, you look at a person, they are a little bit underweight, they are not happy looking, but they are vegans. And also, again, they are not a good example, because not only for other people that are thinking about becoming vegetarians or vegans, but particularly for the rest of the population. Because interestingly enough, if you have a vegan person, and I have seen this, or I have experienced it over the decades, in many cases, a mother is a vegan. Her nutrition is not optimal, it's suboptimal. She has a child, and she breastfeeds it. Of course, all these people that are vegans and vegetarians want to breastfeed their babies. They don't want to bottle feed it. And then the baby becomes usually a vitamin B12 deficiency. Iron is not a problem, because the newborn has enough reserves of iron, but not of vitamin B12. And then they have to go to the doctor, and the doctor investigates, and if he's intelligent enough, he finds out it is B12. Many doctors don't even can't diagnose it because they have not the experience. And if they do, then they usually give a report about this and say, there was a child and almost dying, had vitamin B12 deficiency, and it's terrible, and we should tell people not to be vegetarians. But as we know, every day, thousands, 10,000s of people die because they eat meat, because they are unhealthy, because of their eating. But nobody comments that, really. That's the normal situation. So I think we have to realize this also. People have a different and sometimes a very funny recognition of reality. If one child is very sick, it's a big catastrophe, and if thousands of people die, well, that's normal.
What is, for you, the main cause of vitamin B12 deficiency?
Well, the main cause...
In a vegan diet or vegetarian
Yes,
diet?
well, the main cause is very clearly because they don't eat animal foods. Because vitamin B12 is found only in foods of animal origin. Now, originally, of course, the B12 comes from microorganisms, but it is found in animal food. It's very rare that you find vitamin B12 in plant foods. Sometimes you have small amounts in fermented food, like sauerkraut, but yogurt is again an animal food, but you may find it also in algae sometimes. The problem is, though, that vitamin B12 comes not only in one kind. There are different vitamins, as they are called, and some of them are good and useful for the human body, and many are not. And I'm always irritated, and sometimes I'm angry, because I see on these supplemental vitamin D algae products, for instance, they say this has a high content of vitamin B12, and indeed it does, but sometimes all of the vitamin B12 that's found in algae is not useful for the human body. So there is, this is a big problem. And I've talked to the companies that produce and bottle and sell these products. Please use the proper method to identify how much vitamin B12 is really there. That would be the honest approach. It's very difficult to convince them of this. Vitamin B12 is a big exception in the vitamins. It is not like many vitamins absorbed in the small intestine, but it needs a protein component that is synthesized in the stomach, which is a very interesting phenomenon. This protein is synthesized in the stomach, is released into the gut, and it moves with the food through the small intestine almost towards the end before it goes into the large intestine. And at that place, the vitamin B12 and the protein combine, and then the body is able to absorb it. Now, some people don't produce this protein, and this can be tested very easily. It's a rare condition, and then they have a big problem. Then they have to take vitamin B12 by injection. Mm-hmm. But the other problem that we observe is that older people, in many cases, don't produce this protein either. So they have a problem also. Mm-hmm. So this is a simple mechanism, not a simple, it's an interesting mechanism, but we know all about it, and if there are problems, we can cure it.
Don't you think if you have a perfect body, your intestine is completely clean, the body itself is able to produce and synthesize this vitamin?
The body cannot synthesize it.
In any case?
No, the human body is not able to do it. If you ever look at the chemical structure of the vitamin B12, it's one of the most complicated molecules you can imagine. It's a huge molecule. Many of the other vitamins are very simple. Like vitamin C is a very simple molecular structure. And there you would think maybe the body is able to synthesize it itself. And of course, many, many animals do. There are only few creatures in the world that cannot synthesize vitamin C. Mm-hmm. It's some birds and humans and some of the apes. They can't. And of course, the evolutionary argumentation is, why should the human body be able to synthesize vitamin C if he eats fruits and leaves that contain so much vitamin C? It's not necessary to do it. So this is the evolutionary explanation. But I would like to point out the other fact that is often misunderstood. In the large intestine, we have a huge population of microorganisms. And they produce a lot of vitamin B12. Mm-hmm. But once it's in the large intestine, there's no possibility to get it back in the small intestine, because that's a place of absorption. And the large intestine has not the ability to absorb it. And interestingly enough, in the animal world, where many things are regulated by instinct, for instance, rabbits and hares have the same mechanism. They produce certain substances in the large intestines, and they eat some of their feces every day on a regular basis. So they supply themselves with the vitamins and minerals that they need. And I might tell you of a friend of mine, an American biochemist, who was one of the foremost investigators of vitamin B12. He took his own feces, took watery extracts of it, and drank it. And he could prove that he could supply himself over years wonderfully with this extract. So again, that proves our intestine and our body, so to speak, is able to produce vitamin C, but it doesn't help us. So we have to take it with the food, or when you are a vegan, you have to take it in form of supplements. I think it's most important that if you want to change your lifestyle and your eating, you should do it as long as you are young. Because if you do it when you are young, you'll have the most benefit of it. unfortunately, many people start changing their life only after they have a disease, after they have some pain, and in many cases it's a long, long time, and it takes a lot of discipline to get back to normal. But if you're young, and if you are convinced that this is the right way, then it's much easier, and then it becomes a habit. And one thing that helps young people is that they not do it as a loner. Don't do it all by yourself. Try to get your friends or your sisters and brothers to do the same at the same time. I think you need this support, the social support. It's much easier to do it in a group. I have observed many young people that have tried to do this, and the problem is they are not accepted by their peers because they do something different. And I think whether you are young or whether you are old doesn't make a big difference. People want security. And if you do something different that may be right, and maybe even others see it, that it is right, they will cause others to be insecure. And I have this particular experience. If I go someplace and as a nutrition expert and I do something, then people observe me and say, well, that's funny what he is eating. We do it all different. So they have usually two choices that they make. Either they say, well, he's an expert, he must know what's right, so why don't we do it also? But most people don't react that way. Most people feel insecure because of my behavior, and the only way they regain that security is by saying, he must be on the wrong path. It's him who's wrong. It's not us, because all of us are doing this, so we must be right. And I think once people realize that it's also a problem of security, and also, of course, a problem of psychology, then they are much more willing and much more able to go this new way. So I think for older people, it's more difficult than for young people, because they are not looking for new contexts. They live in their realm, usually in a city or in the country, wherever they are. But of course, they can do this too. They can look for people with similar interests. And one thing I found that helped, because I'm in that age now, in our community, because people know me, and they realize I don't want to be a wise man or tell them things that are not worthwhile, they will listen to me, and we invite them to our house. And we don't talk about nutrition when we are at our house, but we serve the kind of food, vegetarian food, that tastes good. And I think this is part of the secret of convincing other people. And usually when people ask us, it's not the young people, it's usually the older people that ask, what can I do? What's the best way? And then you can give them books and pamphlets and say, read about it. And even in television there are certain people that can tell you about it. The easiest way to really pick it up and get an interest is go to a vegetarian family and see how they do it, and eat with them, and see how normal it is. And usually you will also find these people don't have the common diseases. They don't have headaches and backaches and arthritis and overweight. And this is, as you know, this is one of the most severe problems we have in our countries nowadays. People are overweight. And it's not only the overweight, it is the following diseases that cause a big problem, especially diabetes. And we know that 80% of the people that have diabetes, if they would lose about 10, 12 kilos of their overweight, their diabetes almost disappears. Not in all cases, but in most cases. So I think having contact with vegetarians may be the best way to get the right information, get the motivation to do it. And it's interesting to us personally, because we tend not to talk about nutrition, because when I start talking about nutrition, people feel I want to change their life, and they don't want to do it. But what usually happens, always without an exception, when they leave, they say, can we have the recipe? How did you do it? And I have a whole collection of recipes that I type into my computer, and then I print it out and give it to them because they ask for the recipe.